I'm not gonna, I feel awkward just talking about myself because I don't really know what will be interesting, so I'll try to keep it brief, and then whatever questions you guys have, you can ask. But this is also really exciting for me because I was in a secret society for like a month and then I quit. So I'm kind of imagining that like we're a secret society, but I'm the only one who gets to give a bio. Thank you all for coming. Yes. I don't think that one was for me. Okay, so I was a student here not long ago. We just had our 5-year reunion. I was a member of the Sphincter Troupe while I was here. Hey, great! Yeah, I would love to talk to you afterwards. I don't really know where it's at. And actually, my friend Vanessa back there, she was a fellow Sphincter Trooper with me. So that's cool. That was definitely the best sort of, it was the most fun comedy experience I think I've had up till this point in my life, which is saying a lot. And I interned for The Daily Show when I was a senior in college, my second semester of my senior year. And so I did that, which was how I sort of got to know people there. When I graduated, I moved to LA, sort of I had applied to be a page at NBC in both New York and LA, and I found out that I was hired the day of graduation in LA, and I was just, you'll soon find that it's very scary to graduate and not have a job. So I was like, I'll just take it, I'll just do this, sure, yeah, I'll do this. So I moved to LA, and I was there for about 6 months, and then they called me back at The Daily Show and offered me a job as the receptionist. And I loved my time interning there, so I went back and I worked as the receptionist, and then I worked as a researcher, which is you work in the field department for the field pieces that go on, and then I was the writer's assistant, and now for about 1.5 years I've been a writer on staff. So most of my professional experience in comedy has been with The Daily Show, so if you have questions about other shows, I probably won't be able to answer them. But other than that, I don't really know. Does anyone have questions, or does anyone? I mean, that's 5 minutes of time, so hope there's a lot of tea left.
How's a typical day for you?
Well, we get in at I get in about 8:30 every day, and most of what we do in the show, so we do the show in 3 acts. The first act is a headline. The second act is usually either a correspondent piece, we have, Larry Wilmore or John Hodgman or Kristen Shaw, and it's either that or a piece that we've been working on for more than just that day. It's not specific to what's happened that day. So whatever's in the first act is written the day of the show. So we come in, the studio department has pulled a lot of footage from the night before, and John has probably given us a heads up of what he thinks is interesting and what he's compelled to cover for that day. And so we watch footage on it. Probably about 3 people will get put on the first act headline, and so you're either working on the first act headline for the day, or you're already on the written piece, or you're writing guest questions for the third act. And the show is, the first draft of scripts are handed in around 1:30, and John reads them, and then around 1, and he reads them, and he'll give you notes on them, and then you rewrite them. And what's ever rewritten, usually the second or third time, that's what goes to rehearsal at 4, and then we rehearse, and then between about 4:30 and 6 when we tape, John goes into the rewrite and either completely changes whatever you wrote or changes very little of it. And those are the good days, when he changes very little of it. But sometimes, but it always turns out he always makes the right decision. So that's usually what my day looks like. Yeah.
So what is your source of inspiration for making a really good script that you think is funny and accessible?
I think it's important to find you know, it doesn't all come from Jon, what goes on the show. Sometimes it's people pitching ideas to him because he's not watching the footage he doesn't know what's out there all the time. And I think to write a good headline, it's best when it winds up being something that you're really passionate about. So you have, I mean, now our show is so much about tone that it's, you know, it has to be funny, but everyone who I work with is funny. Everyone in every department is funny and incredibly smart. So the only thing that makes one thing stand out from another is the passion and the voice that you guide that with. So I think that the things that I'm proudest of when I work on them are things that I pitched because I felt strongly about it, or things that I pitched because they interested me, but or finding whatever part of what you're just assigned to that you really are struck by. So I think that's the most important thing. Yeah.
So is there like a protocol for if some huge news story happens between when the drafts are in and rehearsal, like just before rehearsal? Is it just kind of ignored, or do you guys scramble?
Sometimes we scramble. It depends on what Jon wants to do. If he says we want to do, it's not usually we'll do, if it's something really big, we'll put, if you notice, sometimes we have a top of show, which is just like a mini headline right before the bigger headline. So if it's something that we really have to do a really fast turnaround on, we'll make it the subject of the top of show and then do a bigger act on it the next day if it's something that is important enough that we need to come back to it. Or sometimes we'll just decide there's no point in enforcing it and we can do it much more justice if we wait a day.
What's something that's big enough for like a top of show treatment?
Usually if someone says something about Jon and he wants to respond to it. Yeah, I mean, that's really what gets the fastest turnaround, I think.
I'm curious about, like, so you talked about like researchers and that sort of thing, and like, is it the responsibility of the writers to like watch what I imagine is like a lot of footage of, you know, Sean Hannity and that sort of thing, and like mine it for like the perfect sort of cutaway for whatever Jon is saying, or like, and if it's not the job of the writers, like how do they communicate with whoever does have to do all that, you know, like, because it seems like they're always very well like synced up.
I think that, you know, we really work as a community in, you know, throughout every department, so everyone watches a lot of news, but specifically in terms of what is actually your job description, it's mostly the people who are the researchers at our show work for the field department, so it's not so much them who are involved in that. It's the studio department, which is the producers of the show, and the writing department. So the studio department, it's their primary responsibility to really be watching and finding that great footage, and most of it comes from them. But it's because we work so closely with studio writers, tend to come upon that with some frequency as well. And we both are working from, you know, we have these programs, we have, you know, these programs that's really easy to look up stuff from the news that both the writers and the producers have access to. So if they're looking for something, we're sort of looking for it at the same time. And but more often than not, all the production stuff comes from the studio department.
In the past couple months, like up till before the midterms, like there was kind of a debate in the media, like is Jon Steward a politician who's really funny, or like a comedian who's really into politics? I mean, I can guess your characterization of him, but have you noticed like any change, like in the Daily Show's content or in its mood or in its approach to news, like since in your tenure there?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't be comfortable speaking for him. I do feel like there's become more of an acceptance of the influence that the show has. I think for a long time we had this attitude of, well, we just make fun of things. We just make fun of things, and that's what we do. And the fact that you know, things have changed because we've covered them, or, you know, the Zadroga bill, or that he has had some influence, or that there really is a community listening to him. I think that that's been taken more and more seriously. I guess that's what I'd say. But I don't speak for Jon, so.
You mentioned that you started off as a receptionist in the first an intern, but then as a receptionist. Is that path from receptionist to researcher to assistant to writer? Is that a track at the Daily Show, or is that something? Receptionist is a great entry level job into. Is that where you start if you want to be a writer?
I mean, I don't think it necessarily works this way at every show. I think at the Daily Show, more than a lot of places, they do promote from the inside. Our executive producer right now, Rory Albanese, was an intern and a PA and has worked there for maybe 12 years now, and has worked his way up. And my office mate, a fellow writer, started out as an intern as well. But there's 10 staff writers, and he and I are the only ones who have followed that path. And that, some people come in and they've come from LA and they've worked on a million shows in LA, or they, were journalists and they were hired from their journalism background. But that, that was, it's not how everyone works their way up, but it, I think for me it was, I had a lot of opportunities, like I said, it's the best idea always wins at the show. So if an intern pitches something, or if the executive producer pitches something, the funniest thing always makes it on. And so there really is a huge opportunity, even if you're at the very bottom of the ladder, to pitch stuff and to be involved. And there's always a field packet, so anyone can pitch field pieces, and that's something that I did a lot as a receptionist. I just pitched field pieces all the time, because you can't be like going up to Jon all the time and be like, I have this great joke for the headline, and he doesn't want to hear that. But they do want but if you do have good ideas, there are avenues to get that stuff seen. And I was in charge of the intranet as the receptionist, and so as part of the intranet, I decided to do biographies of all of our new employees. So I would try to write these funny things and interview the people who started working there, and I would always submit to the newsletter. And so there were all these ways to sort of do the thing that I wanted to be doing, which was comedy writing, and have it be seen by people who really took everyone seriously. So it was a really effective path for me, but a lot of people don't get there that way.
How is it writing for somebody else's voice specifically? So like when you're writing, how much of it is you being like, this is something that Jon would want to say, and how much of it is you being, this is something that I would want to say?
I think it's a balance. I mean, I think that I was thinking how this was one of the things that I wanted to say today, that I feel like the more you come to know your own voice, the easier it is to do that for someone else. So, I didn't have a tremendous amount of experience writing for other places. Like, I've had, some clips, and I do improv, and I've done sketch shows, and I do stand-up. But the more and more that I've done that at the show, and the more I've found my own voice, the easier it is to come and write for the show. Because if you're always trapped in this fear of, what does Jon want me to say, it doesn't generate a lot of creativity, and that makes it really difficult for me to write when I'm thinking a lot about that. But you have to know him and know, what does he want things to sound like, what is not something that what's too mean. Like, that's a lot of the things I find myself, I find myself writing a lot of things that I'm like, this is so mean. Jon would never do this, But I think, you're always writing for him, but I think that one of the things that makes our show really great is that he is, he doesn't have an ego about it needs to be his jokes. And he does participate a lot. He's certainly a lot of the content is this was his joke and this was his joke and this was his joke. But I think that all of our writers and our producers and everyone who works there is so smart that the voice that comes out of the show is his. It's always his, but it's also all of these other people, and he has such an ability to sort of pluck the beauty out of everyone's talents and make that what the show is. So I think you can't just be thinking about, well, what's going to be okay with him, and I don't think he wants you to do that. So I think it's a balance. Yeah.
Have you always been politically active or aware? I know that you said that in college you were thinking when you graduated about going into comedy writing, but were you thinking specifically about a realm that was really, really influenced by, I guess, politics and journalism, I guess?
No.
Oh.
I think that I've always been, it interests me. It has always been an interest of mine, and current events have always been. And I think when I left school, I was more inclined to sort of be a journalist than I really liked doing comedy, but I was more interested in that sort of writing. And I think it would be really hard for me to write for any other show besides The Daily Show. It wouldn't seem as interesting to write for a sitcom, or, I feel like I learn so much every day and I stay so engaged in my job, and I think that another writing job that was just about writing comedy but wasn't about interacting with the world would be less compelling for me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what are some things that you think are funny? Like, what shows do you watch, or what do you read, or what do you do stand-up on? Like, you can talk about anything.
What do I think is funny? I think, do you guys watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
I think that's really funny. I think there are a lot of really funny stand-ups out there. I'm trying to think of stuff that I'm not just talking about people that are involved with The Daily Show. I think that there's a lot of live stuff going on this road. I think that the Onion stuff, the new Onion News Network and the Sports Network are really funny. Yeah, I think it's actually really incredible what they are doing right now. I don't know. I think my friends are really funny. I think most people are really funny. Yeah. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
How much do you guys interact with the Colbert Report? Because, like, say for instance, you guys both want to cover the same story. Because sometimes you guys do, or there's like overlap to a certain degree. But how does that get resolved? You guys go first, anyways, or you guys are aired first. So you guys always will win.
I mean, that's been that's basically how we see it too. It used to be, I think there used to be, when the Colbert Report was new, there used to be a lot more coordination of that. And I think it got to the point where we just said, okay, well, we'll just do it. If you want to do it too, you do it. Sometimes if a lot of times someone will pitch something and we'll get excited about an idea, and then we'll realize, oh, Colbert did this a couple of days ago and he did it and it was great. And do we really want to try and offer up something and try to say more about that when he's done such an artful job of already covering it? But for the most part, we don't really coordinate. We sort of just let them do their thing and we do our thing.
I imagine that working at The Daily Show is a pretty liberal work environment, but even so, how does it feel to work in the sort of old boys club of comedy?
It doesn't feel like an old boys club of comedy. It doesn't really feel like that at all. So I don't answer your questions.
That's great, but it doesn't feel like that.
So I know last year the blog Jezebel had a whole piece about how women on The Daily Show basically were like, everyone hated them. So I was wondering if I know you guys responded with an open letter, but did that change? Did you have a discussion about it, or did that change anything at the show?
I mean, we.
Could you say what the open letter said roughly? Because I was.
Well, so there was this whole piece on. Oh, I'm so not interested in talking about it. So Jezebel, a writer at Jezebel published a piece that was sort of all of these largely not credited quotes from people who had either auditioned for The Daily Show and never actually worked there, or left the show because they weren't happy there, and just saying that it was a place that it wasn't a comfortable place for women, and so, you know, like and that the women, that there are barely any women on staff, which is blatantly untrue. And so we wrote a letter in response to say that feels awful, because it feels like you're doing this as a feminist blog. We feel more minimized by this untruth that you put out in the internet than what we feel like when we go to our jobs every day and we derive meaning and feel powerful at our workplace. And this makes us feel like we don't count because you didn't even take the time to research whether or not any of this stuff was true. And I think that, you know, there was a pause of, you know, Jon and people, executives asking, like, is this true? Do you feel this way? And I think that we were able to have an open conversation and say, no, it's not. And maybe it was important that we had that check-in, but it was unfortunate that it just wasn't a truth, and it really, people were really interested in it because wouldn't it be great to think, like, wouldn't it be sensationalist and interesting to think that The Daily Show is this really sexist workplace when Jon is this big liberal and this place is supposed to be, you know, this moral force, but it's not a true story, as interesting as it would be for it true. Mm-hmm.
Could you, like, one of the things that I'm interested in is, like, how you come up with ideas for, like, what makes a successful running segment on the show. Like, I guess, like, This Week in God is, like, a past example, but, like, that sort of thing. Like, do you just see a lot of stories come up that seem to fit under a certain umbrella, like religion or whatever, or, you know, Mesopotamia or whatever, Meso to the east of Potamia or whatever. Like, how do you, I guess, like, how do you come up with those sorts of things versus just, like, you know, topical daily headlines?
Well, I'm trying to think if we have any segments now that are like This Week in God was, because I feel more now, something like Mesopotamia or those are more, if we are already writing a story and we think, how can we package this with graphics that we already have? But I'm trying to think if we actually do, you know, we do have a regular, it's usually comes that we're compelled to cover the certain story first, and then we can say, oh, well, this fits into, you know, this is like another example of, like, you're not helping. Like, I think we've done that a few times, or but it's more that we're first drawn to the story and we're thinking, well, how can we package this, or what's the narrative that we want to create in this story, and if it's something that we've already done, we can fit it into that.
So is it, like, less restrictive to sort of, like, move away from that sort of segment, like, running thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I liked This Week in God a lot, but
yeah, that was
but
a
yeah, but I think it's more, yeah, it's more that we just want to feel really current, and so sometimes those things feel less current because it's the ideas being driven by a concept rather than reacting to what's actually happening right now. Mm-hmm.
What exactly, this might sound stupid, but what exactly does a writer's assistant do? Like, do you sharpen pencils?
Well, when the job, I think the job has, when I was a writer's assistant, it was so I would every day. The structure changes a lot. The process changes a lot. Jon likes to change up the process every now and then to keep it fresh. But when I did it, it was if there was a headline, the first act headline, 4 writers or something would write separate passes on the headline, and then we would do a joke pick. So everyone's passes would get put together, and Jon and the head writer and the executive producers would go and sort of in a room with, when I was the writer's assistant, me, and they would pick the jokes that they wanted to put in, and then I would do the assembled version of the first draft of the script, which meant that I would create like an arc for the whole script, and I would sort of do the first pass of it, which was such a good way to learn how to write for The Daily Show. And then after that, we'd give it to Jon, and we'd go into a room where it was usually 1 or 2 of the writers who had worked on the headline and the executive producers, and it would be projected on screen, and I'd be typing, and they'd be rewriting the first pass, or the assembled. And then after I would go to rehearsal every day, and then after rehearsal I would go into the rewrite with Jon and the executive producers, and I would type, and the script was projected on the wall, and I would type as they rewrote. So that is what I did. So it was a really incredible way to be really close to everything that's happening. I mean, I honestly sometimes feel a lot more out of the loop now that I'm a writer than when I was writer assistant, because I was always there for every rewrite, and working really closely with the people who had the last pass over it. So that's what I did. Mm-hmm.
Who agrees to be interviewed during field pieces? I mean, because these people always they're made an ass out of in front of the entire who sees a Comedy Central news team? Yeah, I'll talk to these people and try to explain my point rationally. It's
people just want to be on TV so bad. They just don't care. I honestly think you look at you think of yourself and you're like, well, I'm not a silly person, so I won't look silly. And we all do. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I feel like it's less and less that, though. Well, that's not true. Yeah, I mean, it's not as hard as you'd think. People just want to be on TV. Yeah, was there someone, yeah, you had an answer.
Yeah, do you or anyone you know ever feel pressure to be funny? Not to lose your job, or to, I don't know, just
yeah, no, all the time. I mean, yeah, it's scary, and I mean, you have to just get over it eventually, because the more scared you are, the less funny you are. But yeah, because everyone is so smart, and beyond that, they're so the other writers that I work with, and they're, I'm the youngest on staff, and to be the youngest and the least experienced and trying to sort of hold my own with all these people is very intimidating, and I do feel a lot of pressure, but you just have to get over it, or you will get fired. I mean, that's what it'll be. I mean, I wouldn't really get fired. I mean, I'll never get fired. No. But you just have to do your best to not let it get to you. Mm-hmm.
So when you have days when you're just not feeling funny, what do you do to get over that?
Well, I usually cry to someone who I'm really close to at work. I mean, you just try to, I feel like it's with anything that you struggle with, is that you have to not get caught up on it, and I think that the only thing that gets in my way is getting really intimidated, rather than I face a day where I'm like, just not funny. I feel great, but just not feeling funny bone, So you just have to find a way to talk yourself down from that, and know that it's not like you say, okay, well, I start over tomorrow. It's like, no, I start over right now. I let go of that, and this doesn't have to be the way that this day goes. So, yeah.
What do the correspondents, Jon Hodgman and the people who might go and do a piece, do they have any role in the writing process?
Yeah. So actually, Wyatt and John Oliver, who are correspondents on the show, they're also writers, staff writers. So they won't always. John Oliver will almost always write his pieces, or write his chats and stuff. But sometimes Wyatt won't. But sometimes they'll work on the headlines that they're not even a part of. And then with Hodgman and Larry Wilmore and Kristen Shaw, they will, they'll come in, they'll usually not work on the first draft, but they'll come in and they'll rewrite with people. And then, but a lot of times if it's, all the correspondents are comedians in their own right, and they generate a lot of their material when they shoot the field pieces, because writers don't go on those. Those are the field producers and the correspondents. So they're really generating a lot of the comedy that comes out of the field pieces. If I'm throwing words around that I'm assuming you know and you don't know what I mean when I say like field pieces or whatever, just let me know. But those are the pieces that they shoot, that they shoot and they interview people and stuff. But those correspondents don't write their material, like Samantha Bee or Jason Jones, or Asif or Olivia. They'll generate content for the field pieces, but for the stuff that they do in studio, they won't write that.
I know you said you're in the Sphincter Troop, and also like all my questions about your time at Yale, but I'm really interested in like what you did at Yale really that like helped you, I guess, get to where you are now, and like what other writing did you do? Did you do any other comedy type things during your time at Yale?
I didn't. I took a lot of writing courses at Yale. I've always been really interested in writing, but I didn't take a lot of. I think I took there was like a sitcom writing seminar that I did take here, but I took a lot of nonfiction writing classes, and yeah, I think that what has helped me most in my actual job now that I did at Yale were probably my internship and the Sphincter Troop. But I do feel like one thing that not speaking in terms of a resume, but something that sort of was an important lesson for me that I think drove me was that when I wanted to do an internship, there isn't really, I don't know if this is still an obstacle now, but there wasn't really an option to do that because they sort of had this policy at the Daily Show that you had to receive college credit. So I knew that I really wanted to try for this internship, but Yale's policy was that they weren't going to award credit for an internship. But I still really wanted to do it, and so I just figured out a way that I found one of my writing teachers who would do an independent study with me, and it was going to be satire writing, and the Daily Show internship was going to be a component of the research, and so it was somehow counted as I was getting credit for my Daily Show internship. But it taught me a really good lesson about, like, well, it hasn't been done yet, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. And I feel like that was something I took to the show when everybody thought that, it wasn't really traditional that you would be a receptionist and then you would be a writer's assistant and then you would be a writer. But, and there was a time that people said, oh, they don't really promote up. They used to do that, but they don't do that anymore. And the idea that, okay, well, they're not doing that now, but that doesn't mean they won't, was a really important thing for me to hold on to.